Hi, I'm Brian Kenny, and welcome to ESPN Classic's Top 5 Reasons You Can't Blame, a series that takes a fresh look at sports personalities who are remembered largely for their mistakes, controversial moments, or questionable decisions. In August of 1989, Pete Rose was indefinitely suspended from baseball for betting on games. When his name was subsequently placed on the game's ineligible list, he was effectively blocked from entering the Hall of Fame. Ever since, fans have been divided on whether baseball has been fair to the player with the most hits in Major League history. Here we will count down the top 5 reasons you can't blame Major League Baseball for keeping Rose out of the Hall of Fame. Right now, though, let's look at the evidence in his favor.
The strike one pitch to Rose. Bouncer to the hole. There it is. 3,631. The pass Musial.
Line drive, right field. There's number 4,000.
9 innings or more a day, 162 games a year. Nobody ever played the game as hard as Pete Rose did.
He's not the best baseball player I ever saw, but he played every game like it was the 7th game in the World Series. He played hard every single day. And I've never seen anyone else do that.
I'll always think of him coming in hell-bent for leather from third, trying to beat the throw.
Up the middle. Rose is on his way around. Picked up by Otis. Rose is coming to the plate. Throws a throw. He's in. It's all over. The National League wins. Pete Rose barreled into Ray Fosse, who was slow in getting up.
He would run through that brick wall. He would run through fire. He'd go through hell in a gasoline suit if it took it. Pete wanted to win.
He was the everyman who maximized his ability, where a dad could say to his kid, see that? That's the way the game should be played.
When Rose retired as a player after the 1986 season, his 4,256 hits ranked among a handful of the game's most respected records. That alone guaranteed that the 17-time All-Star would be enshrined in baseball's official realm of greatness, most likely on the first ballot.
There's no other institution in sports which is so sacrosanct as the Baseball Hall of Fame. It is the be-all and end-all of rightness and goodness and success.
The Baseball Hall of Fame is supposed to be for the greatest players of all time, which includes Pete Rose.
Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame? There's no question about that. We're talking about how you performed on the field.
He had numbers that'll never be broken. And the way he played the game warrants him to be in the Hall of Fame.
But in 1989, 2 years before he could be nominated for the Hall of Fame, it was revealed that Rose had repeatedly violated Rule 21 of baseball's rulebook. Not only had he laid bets as a player and manager, he had also wagered on games in which he participated.
One of the game's greatest players has engaged in a variety of acts which have stained the game, and he must now live with the consequences of those acts.
He ultimately ended up being removed from the game of baseball. If you've been banned from baseball, you cannot be considered for election to the Hall of Fame.
If you want to say that the gambling jeopardizes the sanctity of the game, that's one thing. The Hall of Fame honors accomplishment.
In Rose's favor, there are a number of Hall of Fame players who didn't always abide by the rules.
Gaylord Perry wrote a book that he threw the spitball. That's an illegal pitch. He's in the Hall of Fame.
Whitey Ford was a great pitcher for the Yankees, but he might have gotten a little help by roughing up the ball.
Whitey had his wedding ring, and he had a few burrs lifted up on it, and he would scuff up the ball.
And then, of course, that threw the balance of the ball off. So when Whitey threw a breaking ball, it would sink a little more than it would naturally.
More than a decade after his banishment, the majority of fans polled by ESPN believe his plaque belongs on the wall.
He had a 44-game hitting streak. He played in more winning games than anybody. He played in 500 games or more at 5 different positions. It's not going to go away.
2-1 pitch from Shaw into left center. There it is. Rose has eclipsed Cobb. That's number 4,192.
How can you have a Hall of Fame with the player with the most hits in baseball history not in it? It's ridiculous.
It is a joke that Pete Rose is not in the Hall of Fame. If we're looking at pure performance, who greater, with greater hustle than Pete Rose? He should be in the Hall of Fame.
He made an impact on the sport of baseball. If the Hall of Fame truly does celebrate the history of baseball, which I believe it does, he's got to be in the Hall of Fame.
The investigation into Rose's gambling lasted from February until May of 1989. The dishonor Rose brought upon the sport frames why you can't blame Major League Baseball for keeping him out of the Hall of Fame. Here are some of those revelations which did not make our top 5. We call them the best of the rest.
Sports Illustrated. The magazine influenced how baseball commissioner Peter Ueberroth handled the situation.
When SI came up with the goods on Rose betting on baseball, baseball realized we have a serious problem, we've got to deal with it.
Sports Illustrated had told baseball that they were going to run a story that Rose had been betting on baseball. And what was baseball going to do? We can't sit around and have Sports Illustrated control this.
I don't think Ueberroth wanted any of this to come out. I think he was pretty nervous about it when he heard we were looking into it.
If you break a story, people are going to follow, and that's what happened. There was no going back at that point for anybody.
Baseball Commissioner's Office says it is investigating what it calls serious allegations against Cincinnati Reds manager Pete Rose.
I think a compromise could have possibly been made simply because of what Pete represented to the game of baseball. Once Sports Illustrated revealed it and it got out in the media, it took all those opportunities away from both parties.
If it hadn't came out, we wouldn't be talking about it. He probably would still be managing Cincinnati. He would definitely be in the Hall of Fame.
I think that story changed his whole legacy in the game of baseball. If that story had never been broke, Pete would have been in the Hall of Fame by now.
Another best of the rest is Paul Jansen. He provided information baseball couldn't ignore.
Jansen served as a middleman for Pete in running bets.
I started placing bets for Pete Rose on Major League Baseball and on the Cincinnati Reds in April of 1987.
He gave us the betting slips, which we determined very rapidly were in Pete's handwriting. And on those betting slips, it indicates a wager on the Montreal-Cincinnati game.
Besides the betting slips, Jansen handed over a notebook containing wagering records. He also backed up his testimony by taking a lie detector test.
If there wasn't a Jansen, you know what? Pete Rose would be in the Hall of Fame today.
Baseball had to do what they did. Don't blame them at all. When a guy comes to you and says, this fella bet on baseball, you have to investigate it.
Reason number 5, shoeless Joe Jackson. The most prominent of 8 White Sox players involved in the Black Sox scandal admitted to a grand jury that he took $5,000 from gamblers to throw the 1919 World Series. Baseball swiftly made it clear it would not tolerate players gambling on the sport.
Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis was determined to remove every taint of dishonesty that accompanied the throwing of the 1919 World Series and to keep gambling out of baseball.
And that the way he did that was that the 8 players who were involved, he banned for life.
What Landis did was make it very clear that throwing games was going to be the capital crime of baseball.
Although the Chicago 8 were not the first players to be banned from baseball for gambling, Jackson was the first with unquestioned Hall of Fame credentials. The second was Pete Rose.
Pete Rose, a great student of baseball. It is inconceivable that Pete Rose didn't know the story of 1919 and the Black Sox scandal, including the draconian punishment for gambling.
It's right there in black and white in every clubhouse door that you will not gamble, period.
When we walk into clubhouse, there was that sign, do not bet on this game. I can remember Pete going by the sign, looking at the sign, and went, yeah, geek, and walking, kind of laughing.
He knew what he was doing, and he just didn't think he was going to get caught.
No question about it that he knows and knew about Joe Jackson. And he still gambled? There's something wrong with that.
Did reason number 5 suit you? If not, try this one on for size. Reason number 4.
The Hall of Fame. It decides who's eligible, not Major League Baseball.
The Baseball Hall of Fame is a not-for-profit educational corporation. We have no official connection with Major League Baseball.
Major League Baseball does not dictate what the Hall of Fame does or does not do.
I have never expressed an opinion about the eligibility, viability, or appropriateness of any candidate for the Hall of Fame.
There was never any strong influence from the baseball people that sat on the board when the rules were changed.
I'm sure Fay Vincent affected it to some degree, but I don't think that the Hall of Fame would ever bow down to the commissioner's office. It's independent.
In 1991, the board of directors, which included 8 men active in Major League Baseball, ruled that anyone on baseball's permanently ineligible list could not be placed on the ballot for election to the Hall of Fame.
The Hall of Fame itself introduced the so-called Pete Rose rule when he came up for eligibility his first year.
The rule does not mention Rose, merely those on the permanently ineligible list. As long as Rose is on that list, there's no room for his plaque in Cooperstown.
The 1989 agreement Rose signed with Major League Baseball placed him on that list, prohibiting him from working within the game.
I don't think Major League Baseball had the Hall of Fame in mind. I can't imagine Pete would have signed that piece of paper if he knew he wasn't going to go to the Hall of Fame.
It's not baseball's fault, it's the Hall of Fame's fault because the Hall of Fame Board of Directors tightened up the rules of election.
Art Giamatti's heart. The baseball commissioner died of a heart attack 8 days after announcing his verdict to ban Rose from baseball.
At this time, we ask each of you to observe a moment of silence in which to remember baseball's 7th commissioner, A. Bartlett Giamatti.
When Bart Giamatti precipitously died right after throwing Pete Rose out of baseball, it had a kind of Kennedy-esque quality to it, and it raised Giamatti up in stature.
Bart had that something special. He was not only a poet and a scholar, but a man who had enormous respect for the game of baseball.
Of course this hurts, and it hurts because it shakes people's confidence. That's why the commissionership was invented, to maintain the kind of vigilance that ensures the public's confidence.
God rest his soul, but the worst thing that could happen to me is him dying.
When Giamatti died, that took care of that. You know, no other commissioner was going to go against what Giamatti had done.
He was held in such high regard by baseball people, including his best friend, Fay Vincent, who was his immediate successor, and Bud Selig, who also revered Giamatti, that I think either of them would have felt that it was an act of disrespect toward Giamatti to reverse or modify his ruling.
In September of 1997, 8 years after accepting the lifetime ban, Rose officially filed for reinstatement. The petition is still pending. In November of 2002, Rose met with Commissioner Bud Selig and admitted he had bet on baseball.
Every time I talk to Bud Selig, he has been adamant with me all through the years, as long as I'm commissioner, Pete Rose will not be reinstated.
I think Rose is boxed in by the death of Bart Giamatti, that it is impossible for other people to undo the suspension that Giamatti handed out. It's almost as if he killed Giamatti, and so therefore it's going to be held against him the rest of his life.
Have we begun to change your mind yet? If not, take a look at reason number 2.
The Dowd Report. It presented evidence that Pete Rose bet on baseball.
Bart told me, I want you to find the facts, whatever they are. I knew by the middle of March that he was dead in the water in terms of the evidence.
The Dowd Report and the 2,000 pages of supporting evidence is damning.
Investigator John Dowd submitted a 225-page report to Giamatti in May of 1989.
We talked to 100 plus witnesses 3 times. We had 10 people identify Pete betting on the Reds. We had his hotel records, we had the middleman records, and then we have the bank accounts where he is paying off the bookmakers.
Dowd did his job, and he did it well. As a historical document, the Dowd Report's going to stand up as pretty much a classic piece of work.
You can't blame baseball after you get the Dowd Report and it's right there. What are you going to do? And if you're the commissioner of baseball, you got to ban this guy.
Rose lied. From day one, Rose denied the allegations that he bet on baseball.
I said, look, somebody has to ask you the question, have you ever bet on baseball? And he said, no, I'm not that stupid. I thought he was telling the truth.
Publicly, Rose maintained his innocence for 15 years.
I never bet on baseball, and I never bet on Cincinnati Red baseball.
I said, Pete, whatever you did, just tell the world you did it, say you're sorry, and never do it again. And he said, Bill, I never bet on baseball.
I did not bet on baseball. Got too much respect for the game.
And I said, Pete, what about this? Did you bet baseball? Raj, I never bet baseball.
One mistake I would never make is betting on a game of baseball.
The stubbornness, the antagonistic approach to being a competitor, which was his greatest asset as a player, in this case turned out to be the greatest detriment, to come clean and say, yes, I bet on baseball.
I won't tell a lie to be placed into the Hall of Fame. I'm not going to do that.
He was combative, and it was repeated at various points, sometimes in private, sometimes on national television.
Your position still that you did not bet on baseball?
Sure.
His whole presentation was truculent. It was utterly without remorse, and left some of Pete Rose's ardent supporters, including some distinguished Hall of Fame players, flummoxed.
Then, in January of 2004, during an interview to publicize a book for which he had received a reported $1 million advance, Rose finally admitted he had lied.
Did you bet on baseball? Yes, I did, and that was my mistake, not coming clean a lot earlier.
He lied to his best ally, his former attorney, Reuben Katz, his teammates, his friends, his family, his kids. He lied to everybody.
There are a lot of people who are pretty furious about how he conducted himself and feel the apology is insincere and that the book was just an attempt to make money.
I really wish that he had confessed 10, 15 years ago and just come fair with everybody. He was more convincing telling the lie than he was telling the truth.
You can't lie to people for 15 years and then all of a sudden say, hey, I'm sorry, I was lying. Accept me now. It just doesn't work like that.
As a society, we forgive. But when somebody lies about it, I think we as a society have a tough time believing, hey, I'm sorry, but I did it, but now let me in to the Hall of Fame.
We don't want any part of anybody that ever gambled on the game of baseball in this Hall of Fame right here in Cooperstown. I don't want them. The Hall of Famers don't want them.
The only person you can blame for Pete Rose not being in the Hall of Fame is Pete Rose. He violated the most important tenet of the game, and he plea bargained himself out of the game.
Does Pete Rose belong in the Hall of Fame? It depends on whether you separate his playing career from his sins against the game, and how seriously you apply the criteria spelled out in the Hall's rules for election, where voting is based not only on a player's record and ability, but also integrity, sportsmanship, and character. I'm Brian Kenny. Thanks for joining us.
I'm not a fighter no more. I was a fighter as a player. I don't want to be a fighter as a fan. I think if the fans understand that I'm sincere about the problems that I had, about the period of time in my life that I went through, because of the mistakes I made, they may be willing to give you a second chance.